go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for coming. If you do have a question during my presentation, I'd like to ask you to just type it in the chat box. I'll be able to see it while I'm talking. I've got everybody muted right now, and we are recording, and so I'm going to talk for about 45 minutes, and then the last 20 to 15, I'm going to answer some questions that you might have. My slideshow is very basic, and so this presentation is also basic, but I'm hoping it gives you an idea of if you feel like you are experiencing trauma, what that looks like, why it might be happening. So today you're going to learn what is trauma, how do I identify it. We're going to talk a little bit about the lizard brain and bottom-up processing and the role of sensation in trauma healing. So trauma is a breach of the protective barrier against overstimulation, leading to overwhelming feelings of helplessness. Traumatic symptoms are not caused by the event itself. It's caused when you have some energy left in your body that remains trapped in your nervous system. And so the type of trauma therapy that I do is somatic experiencing. I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner, so if you've never heard of that, it was created by Peter Levine. He's got a couple of great books. One in particular is Waking the Tiger. So when you think about trauma, animals are rarely traumatized, even though they're routinely threatened. They're not traumatized because they don't have that extra higher executive functioning that we do as humans, that where they can say, oh my gosh, like that predator almost got me, and I can't believe I was so dumb as to be there when I shouldn't have been. For them, for animals, it's just, yay, I got away. And they go about their business, yay, I got away from the predator. They're just happy they were able to fully complete what they needed to complete. They got activated and had to run, and then they were able to escape from the predator. So you'll see the slide I have up right now with the healthy nervous system. So you can see where, okay, we call it arousal activation, and that might be where something, we hear the word trigger all the time. So something triggers you to fight, flight, or freeze. So it activates your sympathetic nervous system, and your sympathetic nervous system gets your whole body ready for action. It regulates arousal, it increases activity during times of stress, positive or negative. It increases your heart rate, respiration, and blood pressure. So when you're feeling afraid, that might be why, or you're feeling anxiety, that might be why suddenly you feel like your heart is pounding, because it's your sympathetic nervous system activating. It's also shifting blood away from our digestive system to our muscles to allow for quicker movement. So you may notice when you're really anxious, your stomach might hurt, and it just feels like nothing's happening in that part of your body. It also constricts our blood vessels and drains the blood away from the skin periphery. So that's why when you feel anxiety, you start to feel pale and cold, because it's taking all of the blood from your extremities and moving it to your larger muscle groups so you can fight or run away. It dilates your pupils, retracts your eyelids, makes your eyes focus. That's why a lot of times people will talk about, I was in an accident and suddenly I had this super clear focus of what was happening, because your sympathetic nervous system is taking care of you. It's making sure you can run away or escape whatever could be coming at you. Well, so you get activated, your sympathetic nervous system kicks on, but we can't operate in sympathetic all the time. However, the challenge with that is sometimes when we have trauma, our bodies get stuck in sympathetic and we're not able to get the parasympathetic to kick on to do what it needs to help us settle and then recover from the trauma we've experienced. So what happens in your body when the parasympathetic kicks on is, so the goal is to rest. You probably have heard rest and digest before. So the goal of the parasympathetic nervous system is to help us let go of muscle tension, lowers your heart rate and blood pressure, warms your skin and returns the blush, you know, so you have color again because you have blood in your extremities and your skin again, aids digestion, slows and deepens your breathing, returns blood to the peripheral blood vessels, again, back to your extremities. It allows your immune system to fully function again, and then bodily fluids to do what they need to do. So it helps your, it acts like a brake pedal for the nervous system. It helps you relax, unwind, and ultimately do what we call discharge of the arousal of that activation that you've experienced. So you get really active, your sympathetic kicks on, and then we want your parasympathetic to kick in so that you can then settle and start the process all over again. It's supposed to be a kind of slow wave like you see in the image. Well, when you have trauma, oh, let's see if I can move my slide. There we go. When you have trauma, you can see what happens to your nervous system. You don't have that nice, gentle wave that you're supposed to have. You've got the jagged up and down. You can get stuck in certain areas. You can get stuck in on, so you're either ready to flee or fight all the time. You can get stuck in off so that you're in freeze. Because the main, you know, most people have heard of fight or flight, but there's also freeze. A great example of freeze is the possum. That's the reason that they play dead is, you know, a fox may be running after the possum and it's excited and yay, I'm going to catch this possum. And then the possum lays down and plays dead. And the fox is like, man, okay, this isn't fun anymore. I don't get to chase anymore. Forget it, and leaves the possum alone. And the possum goes into such a state of freeze that you can't even tell it's alive or breathing. That's why it looks like it's playing dead. So for humans, it could be depression. They have no affect, so no emotion in their voice when they're speaking. They're tired all the time, very lethargic. Maybe they have chronic fatigue. They dissociate, so they're not in their bodies. They might have poor digestion, low blood pressure. So there's a lot of things that you can have when you don't have a healthy nervous system response. So especially when you're in freeze and you're stuck in off, like you don't really want to do anything. And that typically looks like depression. For someone who is stuck in on and they constantly want to fight or, you know, flee, and they could, have anxiety, panic, hyperactivity. Maybe you accidentally walk by their office and they suddenly jump really big because they weren't ready for someone to walk by and they weren't prepared for it, and their nervous system is set in such an stuck on state that any little thing like that is going to startle them. They can't relax. Maybe they have a lot of chronic pain because of muscle pain. They don't sleep well. So if you're not able to fall asleep or stay asleep, that can be really challenging. People that are stuck in on have a lot of digestive issues. They can have emotional flashbacks and flooding where they can get really overwhelmed with emotion very easily. Again, physically, that's going to be increased heart rate, difficulty breathing, cold sweats, tension. They're going to be hypervigilant, have a lot of racing thoughts, panic attack, rage. And then again, to go back to where your nervous system is stuck and off, it'll be low energy, exhaustion, low heart rate or blood pressure, poor digestion. That's where you have depression, disconnection in your relationship and, you know, with family members. So it's really challenging, and part of the work that I do is helping people go back to what that healthy nervous system should look like, and go and to change so that it's not so jagged and you have that flow again. You also are able to feel open and curious instead of worrying that you're going to be injured or someone's going to hurt you. You're more in your body. That's part of what I do with somatic experiencing, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. They have more resiliency. They feel like they have more regulation and emotional stability. And you really feel like you have choices and options and can reach out for support. So that's what we want a healthy nervous system to look like, is not to be stuck in on or off, but to have that nice, gentle flow. So with trauma and how it works is it's in your body, your emotions and the trauma that you've been through. Your body is what remembers. Another great book is by Bessel van der Kolk called The Body Keeps the Score. And I'll actually type the 2 books I recommended in the chat function so you can see that as options, because they're really great books. They've helped a lot of my clients kind of understand what they're going through and what their experience is like, because it can be really overwhelming to realize, oh, I have trauma and I don't know what to do about it or how to recognize it. So when I talk about trauma, so again, this is any kind of experience that you've been through that you feel like, I can't get over this, or I feel anxious every time I get called into my boss's office because I had this experience before where I got called in and my boss was screaming at me. And that experience, again, it's not the event that has caused the trauma, it's the response to it. So chances are that person came out of that experience with this negative belief about themselves that they carried forward. Oh, I'm incompetent. My boss thinks I'm stupid. And they continue to carry that with them. And those feelings that they felt when they were being yelled at, and then when they were also talking so negatively to themselves, has stayed in the body. And so I've noticed in a lot of my work, and I'm going to go back to that page where you can see the nervous system of undischarged traumatic stress. So like, for instance, again, kind of going back to that boss example, this person probably didn't say anything to their boss. They felt helpless. They felt powerless. And there wasn't anything that they could do to discharge this stressful experience from their body. It just stayed very contained and inside because they may have wanted to yell at their boss or be defensive or flee from the room if their instinct is to flee, and they had to stay there and be yelled at. So their body was unable to do what it needed to do to move through the trauma and discharge it. So they get stuck on, and then every time they go to their boss's office, they feel those same feelings in their bodies as they did when that first experience happened. So it gets stuck in the body. This is why it's really challenging to use cognitive behavioral therapy with trauma, because trauma is, and you do both, but most trauma starts bottom up in your brain. So in your brain, you've got the reptilian brain, you've got, your neocortex, your thalamus. There's all these different parts of your brain, your limbic system. And so the reptilian brain is the very bottom of the brain. It's the one that governs digestion, circulation, breathing, and fight or flight. So if you're trying to work with the neocortex, where all your cognitions are, you can get very stuck. You can understand cognitively in your brain, okay, my boss was having a bad day. It wasn't my fault. I don't need to carry this, but your body still holds on to it because it never got to finish what it needed to do. Just like with when I was talking about the animals, the gazelle is being chased by the tiger, and you see the gazelle get away from the tiger, and it kicks its legs in happiness because, yay, I escaped. It doesn't have that extra layer of, oh gosh, like I should have known better than to be in that area where tigers typically are. Same thing with the possum. The possum goes into freeze and is, yay, I didn't get eaten by the fox. It's able to fully complete that wave that you see in the healthy nervous system. So it's able to get activated, that sympathetic nervous system kicks on to help it get away, and then you see once it's able to settle and the parasympathetic kicks in to help it settle and rest, that it's been able to discharge the trauma that the animal experienced. So that's very much how we are different from animals. They work predominantly from the reptilian brain or the lizard brain and don't have that higher level part of the neocortex that has the cognitions. So the lizard brain is our primitive brain. It governs our instincts and our reflexes. And so that's the that's the part of our brain that teaches us fight, flight, or freeze. It's the part that chooses, what am I going to do in this instance right now? And so because trauma and our experience starts with that part of the body or that part of the brain, that lizard brain, that's so instantaneous, I need to run or freeze or flee, or fight. The language of the reptilian brain or the lizard brain is sensation. So I'm going to go into a little bit about that because it can be kind of confusing, again, because traditionally counseling and therapy has been based on cognitions. How can we change your thinking? Well, we can try to change your thinking all day, but that's where you might see, I work with a lot of people where they have chronic pain or chronic conditions that the medical community cannot explain. They're telling them that, like, we don't know why you have this. There's no bodily problem that we can see. It's because the trauma gets stuck in the body, and this is how it's trying to keep someone safe. So, for instance, the anxiety. If you notice you have anxiety or panic attacks, anxiety feels awful, but it's also meant to protect you. So all of these things that we've developed over time, anxiety, depression, anything that you can find, that's considered a mental illness, is made to protect us. Same thing with what we call psychosomatic illnesses, something where there's no physical medical cause, but the body, the brain is still taking over and causing these things to happen, to cause the chronic fatigue, to cause, low blood pressure or poor digestion, because it's stuck in on or off. And let me tell you a little bit more about somatic experiencing. So somatic experiencing is a method for resolving trauma. It resets the nervous system, can't talk today. It resets the nervous system, restores inner balance, enhances your resilience for stress, and increases your vitality. So one of the first things that I start doing with so many of my clients is helping them increase their capacity. So for instance, if I'll just use anxiety, most people are able to feel anxiety in their chest, throat, neck, shoulders. Maybe they get headaches. Those are some really good examples of where you're kind of wondering like, gosh, where is this coming from? But you have this, so there may be chest up, but you have this whole rest of your body to utilize to manage those symptoms of anxiety. And so if you're mainly trying to just work with a small capacity, when more anxiety happens or more things happen to you, you get even more overloaded. So you're already stuck on, but this might be where you get to another level. You have panic attacks. You have, I like to call them anxiety meltdowns. This is where you might end up crying in the bathroom for hours and you feel like it's not something you can manage or something that is going to last a short amount of time. So somatic experiencing works with the body, works where things are stuck because of your lizard brain. And the language of that is sensation. So when I start working on increasing capacity, I like to start working with sensation. Because number one, when you're using your sensation, that's where if you've been to any kind of counseling before and they talk about grounding, we ask you to use your five senses. What are things that you can see? What can you smell? What do you taste? What do you touch? What can you hear that's going on? And so it's called grounding because it brings you back into your body. So I use that, but take it to a whole higher level with trauma. And so for someone who is struggling with trauma, and some things that I would recommend you utilize to help yourself is going to be sensation. And so you want to work on that felt sense that you have as a human. So, and be able to turn that inward. So we start with the felt sense. We start with those kind of external things like my chair feels really soft, or I can feel the rough concrete under my feet or the grass in my toes. And start with those. What do I see? To really engage that lizard brain to be in your body. Well, once you're able to connect with those types of sensations, then you're able to connect the sensations that are happening in your body and what emotions they are. So, you know, for instance, whenever you feel anxious and you have a lot of stomach trouble and you're going, gosh, like, why is my stomach so upset today? You're noticing what's happening with your stomach. And you might go, oh, well, that's just because I ate something bad last night. Versus, you know, maybe I did eat something bad, but then I also got into a fight with my spouse. And maybe that's carrying through to the next day where you have a lot of stomach discomfort because you didn't resolve the fight. And you've had fights before and it's really uncomfortable. It makes you feel anxious. So your stomach feels really upset, but you don't get to that part yet. That can take a while. I'm noticing the sensation and being curious about it. So when I talk about noticing sensation, it's very much about, we don't want it to be negative or positive. We don't want anybody to put a judgment on the sensation. It's just there. Be curious about it. So like in this slide, you know, you can be open and curious. When people have experienced trauma, they don't want to be in their bodies, because if you're not in your body, then you don't feel the bad feelings to the extent that you would if you were fully embodied. And that can be a challenge. I remember even for myself having my first somatic experiencing session with the therapist and thinking, yeah, you know, I'm pretty good in my body. Like I can feel my feet and my toes and whenever I touch things. But until I did my session, I didn't realize how much I wasn't feeling my body, because the therapist would ask me, you know, what's happening in your body right now? Oh, I'm feeling sad. Well, how do you know you're sad? And that was really hard for me to answer. I really had to stop and turn inward. And so for, you know, like the example with anxiety and your stomach, you know, does it always mean just because my stomach hurts that I ate something that didn't agree with me? Could it also be, oh, I'm feeling anxiety. Let me be thoughtful about that. Why am I feeling this anxiety? And then you can link it to other things. You can link those symptoms and be able to make meaning about what's happening for you. And so again, because sensation brings up emotion, it can be really hard to stay with that. So anytime if you're practicing sensation and really noticing what's happening in your body, you have to do it a little bit at a time. And something I like to stress is that no one is ever going to be perfect. I am not perfect. And so even if you're able to notice a sensation in your body that you've never been able to notice before, but you've only been able to do it 1 out of 10 times that you've tried, that's still success. That is still progress, I feel. And the more that you are able to connect with sensation, instead of your body having to scream at you, because typically what happens is it's not just a little stomach upset, it's really bad. It's, you know, or you're having a lot of muscle pain because your neck and shoulder muscles are so tense that you can't move your neck anymore. And so the reason why noticing sensation and noticing the nuances of sensation is so important is it's better to notice it earlier before your body has to start screaming at you that something is wrong. Because again, emotions live in your body, and if you're not able to listen to it because it's too uncomfortable, it's going to start screaming at you, and then you're going to be even more uncomfortable. You know, definitely some of the goals for sensation are to slow down the nervous system. I mentioned this at the very beginning, but trauma happens because of too much too fast. So we want to slow things down. It overwhelmed your nervous system, and in order to help your nervous system work it through, it needs to be so much slower. This is also why trauma work can take a lot of time. Honestly, why any kind of counseling and therapy can take a lot of time is because your body needs time to work through it. It needs to be able to slow down so that we can broaden the awareness of your bodily experiences to be able to access the sensation, to be able to process through the trauma and using your body to process that trauma. You know, anxiety and panic attacks feel like they happen immediately. Depression is hard too, because someone might notice symptoms of depression, of feeling sad or lethargic, and just think, oh, I just had a bad day, or oh, I'm just tired, until the day comes that they can't get out of bed. And so it's such a challenge, and that's why it takes a lot of time. And I like to joke and use cliches because, you know, they're cliches for a reason. But Rome was not built in a day. And so trauma also was not built in a day or in one instance. It was built in multiple instances. If it's pervasive trauma, like, so for instance, different types of trauma that people don't always think is trauma would be developmental trauma. So if you had less than nurturing relationships with your parents, that can be traumatic. That can create a lot of issues with anxiety, attachment, avoidant attachment. That is a type of trauma of where maybe your parents did not, they never told you they loved you, or they never hugged you. If they touched you, they only touched you in anger. You were only spanked or hit or things like that. But it doesn't have to be something huge and overt to be traumatic. It doesn't have to be, most people think of trauma as going to war or being in an accident or being assaulted. And those are all what we call big T traumas. But and if they're singular experiences, that's a big T trauma. And so then you have the little T trauma, which is the developmental trauma, anxiety, panic attacks, shame is a big one. So if you grew up with parents that were very shaming and telling you, you're a bad girl or you're a bad boy, versus, hey, that's bad behavior, that can create trauma to where you have a lot of fear of always getting in trouble. You have fear about, you have shame about never feeling good enough. Those can all come from trauma. Panic attacks are traumatic all on their own for a lot of people. And so working with where we slow things down and track the sensation that's happening in our bodies gives you more choices, because when you're sitting and being yelled at, you can't get away. Versus if you were able to slow that down and think about what your body wanted to do, maybe, you feel your legs wanting to move. And so then we would really notice the movement that's happening in your legs and what it might need to do. And maybe you need to get up and walk around, or maybe you're in your office and you need to just walk out for a moment, and really noticing the sensation that's happening inside your body of, if I notice the movement in my legs, am I feeling some anxiety? Is my heart pounding? Does my chest feel tight? And then what happens when I actually get up and leave my office? Do I feel, maybe the tension in my chest relaxes? My shoulders will drop. And noticing those sensations when you've actually been able to feel the trauma experience and then mobilize your body to fully complete your experience. One of the top ways of helping yourself when you feel a trauma trigger happen is what we call social engagement. So while it may seem like I don't want to be around anyone while I'm feeling this way, it's one of the easiest and fastest ways to pull yourself out of trauma. So going and, again, you don't necessarily have to go and be part of a big group, but maybe going down the hall and talking to a coworker, calling or texting a friend, to where you can be kind of pull yourself out of that trauma. And not that you're ignoring it. It's at a point sometimes where you can't feel it any longer, or you've been feeling it for too long. And so you need to shift out of that. We don't ever want somebody to, so if you come to my office and we have a 45-minute session, we're not going to spend that entire 45 minutes talking about or even feeling this horrible trauma that happened to you. We're going to talk a little bit about the trauma, and then we might talk about your weekend, or talk about some friends that you maybe just saw and had a great experience with. So that's what we call pendulation, and we're going to titrate the trauma. So we're going to take little chunks at a time and not have a 45-minute session where you're just sitting and talking about or feeling your trauma. And so it may be we work with sensation for as long as you can handle it, and then we move into something that feels more positive, that gives you a sense of embodiment and empowerment and a resource to help you feel better about what you're experiencing in that moment. And then we, again, might go back into the trauma. The nice thing about somatic experiencing is because we focus so much on what's happening in your body, you don't have to talk content unless you want to. It is helpful sometimes to have an idea of what it is that you experienced or what caused the experience, but most of the time, I really like to focus on what's happening in your body at that moment. Are you feeling pressure in your chest or tightness? Is your throat really tight because you want to tell me everything that happened, or you want to yell, you were never able to yell back? Say your parents yelled at you all the time and you just had to stay quiet because if you yelled back, you got in so much trouble, or the abuse became worse. That's also can be very traumatizing for someone. And again, I call it pervasive trauma, but it could be even little things where maybe your mother makes little snide comments about your appearance. And so I like, we call that 1,000 paper cuts, but those 1,000 paper cuts, all of those link together to cause trauma in your body, because every single time she says something negative or painful, your body feels that and holds it, because you were never able to do anything in that particular experience to be able to go move through that healthy way of experiencing trauma. So we've got a little bit, so I want to end or finish really quick because we've got about 23 minutes left, and I want to make sure I have plenty of time for questions. So I would say, again, I want you to be able to leave this talk with something you can do on your own. And so one of the big ones is if you feel very triggered or upset, you feel your sympathetic activation click on, and you want to try to help yourself settle and get your parasympathetic nervous system activated, one of the best things you can do is social engagement. So that is going to be, now when I talk about social engagement, and I'm not talking about like Facebook or Instagram. Facebook and Instagram are very numbing. They help you do what's called dissociate. So dissociation, everybody experiences it. If you've driven somewhere and say you've driven there 10 times and then this is the 11th time that you've gone and you get there and you're like, oh, I barely remember my drive. That's a typical, type of dissociation. The extreme type is called, basically used to be called multiple personalities, but is now dissociative identity disorder. And so what happens, and a lot of us have just kind of a general level of dissociation. It's when it becomes more that it becomes a problem. But in our society, because social media is so, everybody's on it, and it's where we get a lot of our information. But if you notice, you'll start just kind of scrolling and you're not even connected to what you're seeing, what you're reading. It can numb. You're not in your body when you're just kind of randomly scrolling. And so that's a way to dissociate and not be in your body so that you don't feel your feelings. That happens a lot when people have had a bad day at work. And so, excuse me, when I talk about social engagement, I mean particularly engaging with another nervous system. So talking to your spouse, calling your parents, calling a friend, texting with friends, talking to a neighbor if there's nobody else to talk to, even chatting with the pizza guy if you have pizza delivery. You know, a quick chat helps kind of pull in that parasympathetic nervous system for social engagement. Another recommendation I would have would be start getting used to using your felt sense. So that's everything that you can see, hear, touch, taste, or smell, and really focusing on what that feels like and describing that sensation for yourself. Because that's probably one of the hardest things when I start working with a client on sensation is the vocabulary. We don't have the vocabulary. We don't have, it's not part of our society to say, I feel sad. And I know that because my chest feels very heavy. And so getting used to different types of sensations and how you might describe them, and then turning internally and noticing what that feels like in your body. So if you're thinking, gosh, I'm kind of down today, taking a moment to stop and go, why is that? How do I know that? And again, it can be very painful sometimes to check in on that. And so that's where, like, I don't want you to sit there for very long. Sorry, my voice decided to suddenly go. Hopefully I can make it through the rest of this. But again, you want to do little bits at a time. So if you're feeling something that's upsetting or activating to your nervous system, and trying to notice those sensations, 15 seconds, 30 seconds. It doesn't have to be 5 or 10 minutes. And again, you're not going to do it right exactly how you think you should do it every single time. 1 time out of 10 times is still success. And so really getting to that language of sensation in your lizard brain can help you process trauma. So we've got about 20 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions? You're welcome to type it into the group chat. I really want to answer whatever I can and help with that. And again, I wrote into the chat the 2 books that I recommended, The Body Keeps the Score and Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine. Peter Levine is the one who developed Somatic Experiencing. It's a 3-year certification process that I just finished in October. And if you're not able to type, actually, let me see if I can turn, because I do see that some people are on their phones. So I do see I can unmute. I'll unmute everybody. And if you have a question, feel free to ask or say something if you have it. So I've unmuted everyone. So if you do have a question, feel free to ask.
Yeah, dump some of this.
Or mute yourself back if you don't have a question. That's fine too.
She's opening the line for questions.
Okay, it looks like you can't tell if I have. Let me review the chat and see if something else comes up. But again, this was very I took a very complex issue and trying to bring it down into 45 minutes is a challenge. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or comments, or really want to talk to me and see if somatic experiencing is right for you. My email is becky@eddinscounseling.com, EDDINScounseling.com. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have. I strongly recommend you grab a couple of these books. Oh, look, okay, here's a question. Great. What's a good way to shift out of focusing on those sensations after you've accessed it for a short period of time? Great question. Okay, because that can be a challenge, especially if you find that you tend to really hyper-focus. And so that's where, again, if you're doing a lot of internal sensations and looking to see what's happening in your body, that's where you can, to shift out of that could be changing the sensation. So that's where you'll use a lot of your felt sense. So maybe start kind of feeling what your desk feels like, noticing that it's smooth, because we don't want you to go and look internally and really drop deeply into it, but noticing, a little bit of time happening when you kind of focus internally. And so that way you're not spending half an hour noticing how sad you are and then you start crying and you can't stop crying. So that's where, if you're noticing, okay, I'm focusing internally, it's okay to cry, but cry for a little bit until you feel like maybe you get to a good stopping point. Or if you can't, that's where kind of shifting where your focus is can be really helpful. It's not necessarily, a lot of people ask me like, so you want me to distract myself? And it's not, it is a form of distraction because it's taking you out of that, the uncomfortable sensation, but it doesn't mean you're never going to go back to it, because a lot of what I want you to do is just notice the sensations as they come up, not making a judgment of like, oh, that feels bad. Just notice like, my chest feels tight, like, and noticing like what that really feels like before you go into, oh my gosh, my chest feels tight. That must mean I'm anxious. Oh my gosh, what could I possibly be anxious about? And then you do like, you fling yourself off the cliff into anxiety. I like to jokingly call it, or go, fall into the rabbit hole. And so again, it's being very focused about, I'm only going to step into this for, 15 or 30 seconds, as much as I feel I can handle, to help kind of move myself out of that, and then just look at something else, do something else, engage your hands with cooking, or, something like that. I hope that was helpful. Did that answer your question? Because I can always expand on that if I need to. Great question. Thanks for asking. Do I have any others? I'm more than happy, again, to answer anything. Okay, here's another great question. Imposter syndrome. So imposter syndrome, that can be challenging because it also depends on how you describe it. So the question is, how much is known about imposter syndrome, but would it be related to developmental trauma? So imposter syndrome typically is not feeling good enough. And yes, typically when you have a low, what I call low self-worth, or just not feeling good enough, that could be for multiple reasons. Maybe your parents didn't necessarily say that you aren't good enough, or they weren't telling you weren't doing well. It could be maybe they never told you did well. And so you never knew if you were actually good at something. I mean, maybe you made good grades, things like that, but you didn't have that external person, caretaker, saying like, hey, we really care about you and you're doing a great job and we really love you. So it really could be related to a lot of things, but I think it is accurate to kind of assume it could be related to developmental trauma. And it wouldn't always have to be a parent. It could be, you know, anyone who is primary in your life, a grandparent, a sibling, a teacher, where you don't feel good enough, or you feel like people are praising you when you don't deserve it. And you kind of doubt what they're saying to you, because your body is not able to, you're not able to fully embody that sense of self. I hope that made sense. Because that's a tough one. Imposter syndrome could look so many different ways for people. But it's typically a lot of not feeling good enough, and potentially a lot of feeling a lot of shame, which can definitely be related to developmental trauma. Is it always? Not completely sure, but it would make sense if it is. So I hope that helped. So the next question is, so is exposure type therapies no longer the preferred treatment for anxiety traumas? So I look at Somatic Experiencing as my trauma foundation, and I am also trained in EMDR, and so I look at EMDR as a tool. Now, EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So it does have that area, that part where you get highly activated, and then it is trying to desensitize those feelings of activation around a particular incident, a particular traumatic incident. So, however, because you are activated at such a high level for such a long time, it can be traumatizing for some people. It can cause a lot of emotional dysregulation. And so that can be really challenging for a lot of clients, because if they are not stable enough or don't have enough resources to be able to regulate their emotions, they can have a traumatic EMDR experience. They can have a traumatic exposure experience, especially if it lasts for a long time. It's a long session. It also depends on, you know, their response to the session. So for me personally, I don't prefer treatment for anxiety to use any kind of exposure type of treatment for anxiety, because I feel like, because one thing I don't ever want to do to a client is re-traumatize them. So those kinds of things can be re-traumatizing. I definitely feel my somatic background now has made me a much better EMDR therapist. And so, but I do prefer somatic experiencing for most traumas. I might use something like exposure or EMDR for a single event trauma, like first time someone's ever been in a car accident. First time, you know, maybe someone has only had recently started seeing me and they've only had a few panic attacks. Maybe they had a single incident of assault. I'm more likely to use something, you know, EMDR for something like that versus more of the developmental traumas or multiple assaults or multiple accidents or even multiple falls. I'm more likely to use somatic experiencing for that, because I never want to re-traumatize someone. And I feel exposure therapy can sometimes re-traumatize people. I know that was a very long response to your question, but thank you for asking. All right, we got about 5 minutes left. I've got more time for questions if you all have them. I really appreciate all of you. I know it was kind of a last minute change, but we were just trying, we want to keep everybody safe, and we didn't want anybody to miss this presentation because they were uncomfortable coming to the office or anything like that. So I really appreciate your understanding for changing it to a webinar. And this will be recorded, or it is recorded right now, and we will be putting it, I believe we're putting it up on the website. I will double check, but chances are we can do that, or we can email you a replay. So you can go back and listen through and see the slides and all of that. And again, my email is becky@edenscounseling.com. So if you think of questions after the fact, absolutely feel free to email them to me. I will definitely get back to you. I'm just so thankful for everyone's participation and interest in this topic because it can be really challenging. And I consider myself a trauma specialist and I absolutely love working with it. So I'm excited to share my experience with everyone. All right, well, it looks like I don't have any more questions coming right now. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish the webinar for now. But I hope everyone has a great evening. Stay healthy, stay safe, and definitely please reach out to me if you need anything. Thank you so much. Have a great evening. Thank you so much. Bye.